What is going on? My name is Mark Dolinar, and today I'm going to be showing you some tips and tricks that I've used to help me to actually stick with a budget. Now, according to debt.com, an overwhelming majority of people agree that everyone needs to have some sort of a budget. But really, how many people actually stick to a budget each and every year? Now, as a new grad, it's an exciting time. Your first job, you're out on your own, and maybe you're even in a new city. But it's also the first time that you're handling your own personal finances. Now, I've been out of college for 6 years now, and I can tell you, when I got my first job, I was in no way prepared to actually handle my finances. I had no idea how to create a budget. I didn't even know what I actually needed versus what I just wanted. Nor did I understand why this was so important. So I ended up spending all the money I made without even thinking about it. Now, for that job, I moved across the country, and at that time, I had packed everything up and threw it in the back of my truck. When I moved, I barely had $1,000 left in the bank, and at that time, I was actually fortunate because I was able to stay with some relatives for a few weeks until I actually found a place of my own. But once I found that place, that's where my financial problems began. I was overly enthusiastic. I was on my own for the first time. I actually had a good paying job and a brand new apartment that was basically a blank slate. But at that time, I went a little overboard. I thought I needed to buy everything all at once. Like a couch, a bed, a desk, TV, computer, kitchen equipment, you name it, I probably tried to buy it. But at that time, I was fortunate because I didn't have a credit card. So I was forced to actually buy everything with my paychecks as they came in. Now, not having a credit card at that point in my life actually saved me from years of potential debt. And for that, I'm truly fortunate. But I wasn't really out of the woods just yet. I remember getting paid on a Friday and going directly to IKEA and Target, just buying things in general to furnish my place. I even went as far as to buy a 65-inch plasma TV. Yeah, those were such a thing back then. And that thing wasn't really cheap. I repeated that cycle for months until one day I found a mountain bike for sale on Pink Bike. And you know what? I actually needed some cash to pay for it. So I went down to the bank and pulled the cash out. At that time, I looked at the receipt and I had less than $100 left in my account. That was devastating for me. You know what? I don't know why, but that was actually the moment that everything began to click. I'd had a job for months, and yet somehow I was worse off now than I was before. And that really didn't make any sense. I was putting in the hours, yet it felt like I was going backwards financially. Definitely not what I thought I was supposed to be doing. Now, with that, I'm not actually claiming I'm a minimalist, and actually, I'm far from it, especially with all the things that I collect. But I am much wiser now when it comes to personal finance, and I wanted to share some tips and tricks on how to stick with a budget in this video. So let's go ahead and begin talking about tip number 1. Now, the first thing that you need to do before even trying to work out a budget is to look at your personal spending habits right now and figure out what your behavior is. Creating a budget has more to do with curving your own behavior than it does with writing a number on a page. Ultimately, do you go out to the bars every weekend? And how much are you spending there? Are you buying things left, right, and center, like the new iPhone or any iPhone when they first come out? Ultimately, anyone can put a number on a page, and that's why so many people fail to stick with a real budget. It really takes something to actually push you, to motivate you, and make sure that you stay for the long term. Now, in my case, my wake-up call was seeing a low balance in my banking account after months of hard work. The first thing to do is find your why and make sure that your motivation is there before anything else begins. Now, once your why is covered, the next thing that you need to do is actually find a realistic number. When I first tried budgeting, I went way overboard and I tried to save every single penny I made. I stopped going out. I started eating ramen for a bunch of meals and anything that I could do to really save money. Now, that's a great approach and it helps you to save money really fast. It's not really a long-term solution. And I ended up burning out within a couple of weeks and falling back into old spending habits. Ultimately, money is a tool and it shouldn't be a curse. If you have a budget that is too strict, it's only going to end up demotivating you over time. Instead, loosen the reins just a little bit, because ultimately, life isn't a sprint, it's a marathon. Now, for tip number 3, this has actually been extremely successful for me, in that I actually use 2 bank accounts. Now, through work, I actually have my paycheck deposited in both of these accounts. One is my primary, that receives about 80% of my paycheck, and I use this account for literally everything, for rent, food, insurance, student loans, and going out to eat. And it's readily available to me. I carry that debit card and any cash. The other account is one that I rarely touch, and I purposely make it this way to almost trick myself that I make less money every month than I really do. This is definitely a psychological tactic, but at the end of the day, it can actually be extremely helpful to use. My savings account isn't linked to any of my bills, and I purposely keep that bank's app off my phone as to not actually look at it and realize what the balance is of it. Ultimately, it's amazing how much less you're willing to spend when you see a lower paycheck come in each and every week. My second account acts as more or less a savings or an emergency fund that I rarely or never touch. And the great thing is, everything is on autopilot. I can be as lazy as I want, not even think about saving, and still save a good chunk of change every single month. So if you're having a hard time sticking with a budget, try opening a second account and see how much easier it can be with everything on autopilot. Now for the next tip, this is about motivation. And you know what? Ultimately, it's always helpful to have targets to reach for and to celebrate. For instance, you might have an initial target of $1,000. Once you hit that point, maybe you go out to dinner and celebrate. But hold off. Don't go someplace fancy like Ruth Chris. Even though their steak is amazing, the whole goal is to kind of celebrate a minor win and not to blow your entire budget that you've been reaching for. But you can actually carry this on at different levels. Go to $5,000, $10,000, $15,000. Maybe if you save $20,000, you can go on vacation. These can be as a group, or they can just be personal celebrations, just as something to keep you motivated and always moving forward towards that next goal and that next reward that you're going to give to yourself. Now, according to debt.com, the number 2 reason for not budgeting is how time consuming it can be. And you know what? Years ago, this may have been an excuse. Spending with cash, tracking receipts, and writing or creating a spreadsheet. The whole process itself could be upwards of 2 hours a week, depending on how much you actually spent during that previous week. But we really don't have to do that anymore. So that excuse isn't here. Most of our credit cards and debit cards actually track all of our spending and put it into individual categories. Simply glancing at your statements or even downloading your charges to a spreadsheet can help show you exactly where your money is going each and every month. The best part, these banks are giving you this data as a tool to help. So make sure to use it and help reach your savings goals. Now the final tip is a little unconventional, but this needs to be tweaked, especially in today's world. According to a MIT study done back in 2001, people who spend on plastic buy upwards of 100% more than people who carry cash. Now, there is a psychological feeling of loss when using cash that you don't receive when you're using a plastic card. Back in 2001, this was a study done before credit cards were really as readily available as they are now. Back then, people still paid with cash. And right now, credit cards are used even more so, especially as we're getting into touchless pay with your phone or your watch. That feeling of loss is now lost. So how do we really go through and recreate it? Well, in short, you can't recreate that exact same feeling, but you can kind of get a little bit close. By keeping receipts for each and every purchase, you can actually regain some of that loss. It's a small step, but ultimately, when you do this with every purchase, you'll begin to have a better sense of how much things are actually costing throughout the day and throughout the week. Now, that's 5 easy tips that can help you incorporate into your daily spending habits almost immediately. Ultimately, the big thing is don't overthink it. Budgeting can be as easy or as hard as you want it to be. Now, let me know in the comments if any of these tips were helpful for you. Or maybe you have something else that you use to help stick with your budgets. I'll see you next time.